Welcome to the Doggy Dojo. I'm your host, Susan Light, a Los Angeles-based dog trainer and behavior consultant on a quest to become worthy of the title Sensei of the Doggy Dojo. Today we're talking to one of the industry's leading experts on aggression about a very specific type of aggression, stranger-directed aggression or stranger danger. And we're zeroing in even more to talk about dogs that struggle with people coming into their homes. So if you've got a dog that barks or wants to bite when you invite people over, you've come to the right place. I'm so excited to welcome this guest. He's the founder of AggressiveDog.com and focuses on teaching other professionals around the world how to successfully work aggression cases. He's a 5-term president of the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants and was the Association of Professional Dog Trainers Member of the Year in 2020. He's sought out for his expert opinion by numerous media outlets. He hosts a popular podcast, The Bitey End of the Dog, where he chats with foremost experts on dog aggression. And he's been a featured keynote speaker at conferences, universities, and seminars in more than 200 cities and 20 different countries. He offers a variety of educational opportunities on the topic of canine aggression, including the Aggression in Dogs Master Course and the annual Aggression in Dogs Conference. Please welcome Michael Shikashio. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
How common is it for you to see dogs who specifically struggle with strangers coming into their house?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is a very common issue. It's probably one of the most common cases I will see. And it's difficult for a lot of our clients or my clients and the dog guardians that are out there, because it really can be impactful to their lifestyle and the amount of visitors they can have over, and really having to be cautious a lot of times and worrying about their dog. So yeah, it's a common struggle for many people.
Do we know why? Because I think a lot of people, they're always like, oh, they're just so protective of me. Is that accurate?
That's the romantic thought, I think. We like to hear that, oh, I think he's just protecting me. And then as consultants and trainers, sometimes we have to help them understand, well, maybe it's the dogs trying to protect themselves because they're worried about the strangers coming in. But it can be that sometimes. So the most common reasons are for dogs that have issues with strangers coming onto their property, or even if it can be off property, seeing people out and about. It's typically fear. So the dog's just concerned about that person. They're the intruder alerts, there's somebody coming to the home and they're worried about what they might do to either themselves. It could be a threat to their resources. Are you coming near my stuff, my food, my bones, my dog beds? Are you coming onto my property? Because that could be another resource that the dog might be motivated to protect. It can be the people in the home. So that can happen where the dog's saying, ooh, don't hurt my person, or don't come near my people. So it could be that as well. And that can be in two formats. So the dog could be saying, this is my person. I don't want you to take them away. Sort of like, I don't want you to take away my stuff. So it's almost like the person's a resource. Of course, it goes beyond that, where there's a relationship as well. But it can also be the dog's truly protecting that person. So the dog saying, you are a threat to my family here, and I'm going to protect them and do what I need to. So that's less common. That's not as common, but and you typically you'll see that in certain breeds like German Shepherds or Belgian Malinois or Rottweilers. Not all the time, but those breeds are going to be more, you'll see
prone
those tendencies, come out with those breed specific behaviors. But the most important one that often goes missing or misdiagnosed is pain, underlying pain issues. So the dog's just worried about, is that person going to touch me? Can I trust them not to touch my painful spot, or make me get off my dog bed, when I'm trying to rest here? So I do like to mention that, because it is really important to consider underlying health and pain in these cases as well.
Ah, that's so interesting. And that's not, normally I think about pain for aggression, obviously, but I didn't think about it specifically for strangers. And it's because they're unpredictable, right? The dog's like, I know how my people are going to act, but I don't know about you.
Exactly. Yeah. They haven't built that trust with the person yet. So Sometimes you'll see the dog say, okay, now I can trust you. You're predictable. You don't try to touch me. You can read me well. We can communicate well. And so that dog invites that person into their inner circle, right? So they can trust them. And that's why sometimes you see the dogs, there's no history of showing aggression to the people that they live with, but it's still an underlying pain issue. Maybe because, again, that person is just not doing things to elicit any pain responses, or, it's just that the dog trusts that, the movements and the behavior of that person more. And so that's why it can be confusing when the dog lashes out at a stranger and the person doesn't know the underlying reason. So it can feel confusing and sort of out of the blue sometimes, but when we get into the details, we can almost always determine why the dog is displaying aggression towards somebody.
Wow, I love behavior. I love picking it apart like that. So fun. I do want to come back, and I love that you use the word predictable. I'm sure we're going to come back to that word when we're talking about our kind of training plans for this. But let's start at the beginning. If you have a puppy or a new rescue, is there any way people can kind of work to prevent the dog developing this?
Yes, definitely. It's, we talk about that word socialization, but, it's not just socialization, right? It's proper socialization is really important, because sometimes you kind of have to start knowing the dog in front of you, the puppy in front of you, what their sort of personality is like, because you might have one that's a little more prone to being shy around strangers or needs a little bit more time to warm up. And that could be through their own experiences. It could be genetic. It can be in utero, with how the dog, even the puppy's mom experiences things. That can all impact how that puppy's behavior, all tendencies are going to be. So when we go to socialize them, gradual exposure to new people, new places, new sights, sounds, smells, and those kind of things, you might want to go a little more slowly with some puppies than other puppies. And then you have the opposite. You might have some puppies that are very confident and bold, and they're just going up to everybody and licking everybody, and they're just happy about life. That's going to be a dog that needs much less socialization or even less care in really taking our time to ensure that puppy feels safe. So the first step is just kind of getting a good idea of the puppy you have, and then taking the next steps in socialization. And that socialization is very important. We want to get the puppy to see and experience those different stimuli. So, a big guy with a deep voice with a big hat coming into the home versus some child that's more soft spoken. We socialize them around a lot of different experiences, and that's going to be very helpful so that way they start to say, oh, I've seen that before, and that person's safe, and that kind of person's good and safe. And so that's how I go about socialization. It's no set recipe, but kind of adapting what you need to do based on, again, what kind of dog you have in front of you.
Absolutely. And when you say proper socialization and going at their pace, it's important that these experiences be positive for them, right? So it's like, keep it short, watch the dog's body language, and don't force the interactions. I think a lot of people think socializing the puppies, throwing them in with a bunch of dogs so that they learn how to play with dogs. Or, I see them taking really, really young dogs to the dog park, or handing the dog around and they're, a bunch of strangers are touching them. So that's not what we're talking about.
Exactly. Yes. It's, so, because that looks like it works sometimes, right? So those approaches are really just not taking into account the puppy's wishes and reading their dog body language, because that's how you can tell is often the behavior in the body language. That's going to tell you what's appropriate for that puppy or not. And if they're shying away and their ears are getting pulled back, or they're pulling away or struggling while somebody's holding them, or they're showing subtle signs of stress like lip licking, yawning, and whale eye, where you see the white of their eye, you start to see those subtle signals that we should be paying attention to, because then that's saying that that's too much of an attempt at socialization. So we need to take a step back and really consider how that puppy's feeling. And again, the body language, the behavior is going to tell you all of that. So we have to be careful how we do socialization, and sometimes those attempts at being very consistent and getting the puppy around to lots of different people and people holding that pass the puppy kind of thing that we used to do around in the group classes.
Totally.
We have to consider just how much it's going to impact that puppy. So slow and steady is better than trying to rush things and just meet that those really elevated goals of 100 people in 100 days kind of thing. Again, could work for some puppies.
Did they used to say that?
Yeah, it actually was a thing, 100 people in 100 days, which is, I like the advice. It's not nuanced enough. Yeah, 100 people in 100 days, great goal. I love it, but it's just, how is that 100 people going to happen? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many of these things come back to learning canine body language. I've said it so many times. I think the number one thing that would improve animal welfare is if we learned their body language. Mm-hmm. So we have a whole episode about that with Lily Chin. So we won't spend too much time on it, but it's part of it. So let's go back. So we have this dog, they have this issue with strangers. What's the prognosis? Is it something that can be changed through training, or do you mostly manage it?
It depends, as they say. And I think it depends on how much that dog or puppy is allowing people into their inner circle. Because you have some dogs that, I can go to the home and within 5 minutes I toss the dog some treats, and the dog's like, and the dog might have a history of barking at strangers or having issues with strangers coming over. But some dogs that within 5 minutes, I'm tossing them cheese and they're like, I actually love this guy. Really nice and cool. And he's reading me, he's reading my body language. He's easy to communicate with. He's tossing me cheese, so this guy's great. So those are and that's a lot of the cases. You're going to have cases where it's very easy to get the dog to warm up to you. And then the next thing you know, the dog's like, you're a part of my family now. And there's the other cases where it can take much longer. You could go 3, 4, 5 times, months of, gradually getting closer to the dog and doing all of those typical approaches we would do with, making ourselves safe, using positive associations. That can take much longer. So the prognosis often isn't as good for those dogs. But that just part of the picture. There's, of course, many other things we want to think about, such as, how much of an impact it could be having on both the dog's quality of life as well as the person's quality of life. Because it's difficult to live with a dog that just really is, barking, lunging, trying to bite every person that comes over. And the dog has to be really managed, and the person can't have as many visitors or guests. And, and then you can double up with other behavior issues, and maybe the person can't even leave their home in some cases. It can really restrict their quality of life. And the same can happen to the dog, unfortunately, because of the management we put in place, which is responsible. But that, of course, decreases the amount of exposure the dog has to other environments. They're not able to go to the dog park or, the park, or even sometimes outside their own home. So it's a very restrictive lifestyle, which then in turn can impact their behavior even further in a negative way. So, there's a lot of things to consider, and that's a big part of it, is how long does it take to get to the inner circle, and as well as how well the client can manage it while thinking about the quality of life for all involved. In some cases, it's really easy. So we all know, we've heard that term, that farm out in the woods, right? The dog just needs a good farm out in the woods where there's no people around.
This magical farm.
Yeah. And how often does that exist, right? But sometimes that's doable. Like there is actually some farms out in woods that dogs live at, and they can actually live a very good quality of life because you're not worried about strangers coming over that often. So management and the ability to manage it is a big part of it for me in assessing the overall outcome or prognosis in a case. And then you can, of course, take into all account the other variables we'd look at, like the level of bite history, if there is any bite history, the size of the dog, if there's any previous incidents like lawsuits or dangerous dog designations, that can again present some quality of life issues. So many other variables, but the big ones for me are, is how is this dog going to continue to live their life? Can they get a bigger inner circle, and can they still have a good quality of life while we're working through things? Because you really never do stop this behavior, right? It's behavior, and it's quite normal in many contexts. It's just like people, if they're fearful of something or they want to protect something of value, they may resort to an aggressive response, whether it's yelling or punching somebody or something to protect themselves or protect somebody they love or protect something of value. So it's quite normal behavior. We never shut it off completely. Our goal is to just simply decrease the likelihood of it. And so for the cases where where no matter what we do, we're hardly decreasing the likelihood of it because of the environment or because of the genetics or, all underlying health issues that can't be really resolved, then, the prognosis is not quite as good for those scenarios. So lots to consider to answer your question.
Yeah. If you want to work with Michael, check out his website, aggressivedog.com. He has resources for pet parents and trainers who want to learn more about aggression. You can check out his podcast, The Bitey End of the Dog. And if you're a dog pro that really wants to develop their skills for working with aggressive dogs, you can't do better than his master course for dog pros. You can find out about this and more at his website, aggressivedog.com, which I'll link for you in the show notes. We'll be right back. And what about if the dog struggles with one of the people that lives in the home?
Yeah, that can even be more stressful because so different scenarios can happen, right? So some of my cases, I live near a naval base, so where the Navy has a station there, and a lot of these couples, sometimes the sailor comes home from deployment and the dog's never met the person. So the dog's like, who are you? And what are you doing in my home? When the person's like, this is my home. I actually live here, but never met. So you have those scenarios. You have sometimes couples that move in together. So it's like the dog is living with a stranger from day one. And so it can be really tough for both the person who has to walk on eggshells around their own home, as well as the dog experiencing 24 hours a day, sometimes of stress because of this strange boogie person in the home, right? So this new stranger that they're afraid of. So it can be really challenging because needs to be a lot of management, and there's a lot of detrimental impacts to the relationship between often the couple as well as the dog and the person they're having struggles with. So I often go into those cases with a lot of careful management, meaning making sure both the person and the dog have a safe space in the home they can retreat to, or just be a place where they don't have to worry about the other party as we work on the issues. So of course, we're going to try to repair the relationship and start to fix things. But in the meantime, it's just like any other case where there's aggressive behaviors. We have to manage it so the dog can't practice the behavior and get reinforced for it, but it's also to reduce the amount of stress. And in these cases, we're reducing the stress significantly for both parties, the dog and the person in the home that the dog's showing aggression towards.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've said management a lot. What kinds of management specifically do you suggest?
So standard stuff, like baby gates, exercise fence. I'm really careful, though, how I set up management. So we have barriers let's just classify all those as barriers. So it could be a leash on the dog. It could be a dog tethered to something, and not for long duration, but just for the initial stage.
Exactly.
It could be crates, exercise doors, anything that's going to protect the person from a bite. Now, in those situations, we have to consider the dog's feeling of safety. So the more restrictive something is, the more likely they're to feel unsafe because they can't get away. So for certainly a crate, if I put a dog in a crate and I have, Uncle Bob walk right up to the crate, that's going to be a problem for the dog because they're severely restricted. It'll keep Uncle Bob safe most of the time, unless he does something stupid and stick his hand through the door. But it's very much restrictive to the dog. So I'm careful about how I do management. So it might be a baby gate or an exercise pen, but it'll be making sure the dog's in an area where they have the most choice and control, meaning they can move away if they need to, they can go into another room if they want to, and we'll keep the person in the small space. You can even put the person inside the exercise pen instead of the dog. So the dog has the whole, area to move around in, but then it's just the person is still safe. So for training scenarios, we're talking about here, we're not going to have that person in the X pen all day, but it's, so when we're doing the introductions,
when we're working on our exercise.
Exactly. Yeah. Then we have those layers of safety. So management can look like that. And usually if there is a bite history, I'm going to be acclimating the dog to a muzzle. So that way, when we're starting to strip away those other layers of safety, or protective contact, they call it, is to have some other layer of safety in place when we get to more close proximity exercises. So things like, the petting or the interactions that might happen between the human and the dog, the muzzle will still keep that person safe. And that's usually in the cases where there is a bite history. because we, of course, don't want another bite in those scenarios. So muzzle, it has to be well acclimated, though, meaning the dog should be very comfortable wearing it. And so we don't run into any problems where the dog's saying, oh, every time I get this person coming over, I get this icky thing put on my face. So I really don't like this person. So we have to be careful taking our time with that. But usually we can do that because we have the time in between when we first start out and we're using other layers of protective contact, and then we move into the muzzle with more close proximity.
Yeah. And I am a big proponent of everyone teaching their dog to be comfortable in a muzzle. I do it with my dogs, and it's just, I tell people, I'm like, your dog will need a muzzle at some point, even if it's not until they're old or they get injured, something happens. It's just so much better to have it before you need it. Like you said, to take your time, go at the dog's pace, and have a really positive association with it. So it in itself does not cause stress in what will be a stressful situation when you're using it is just so valuable. So the time to do it's before you need it. So that's why I really feel like you can't go wrong muzzle training a dog.
Absolutely. I'm 100% in agreement.
But yes, we bring it in as management for bite history is non-negotiable.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. So now that we're talking about like these layers of management in place while we're doing the training exercises, what do those exercises look like? What is a common training plan?
Yeah. So the goal here, number one thing to think about before implementing any training plan is safety, meaning not only safety from the management perspective to prevent bites, but safety so the dog feels safe. So because most cases of aggression directed at strangers is born out of the dog not feeling safe about something. So they're worried about you taking their resources, worried about you threatening their people, worried about their own self being harmed by this person. So we have to make sure we're setting the stage for success by ensuring the dog feels safe. And the variables we can control typically are distance, so how far that person is from the dog, duration, which is the length of time the dog's exposed to that scary person, and the intensity, which is what that person's doing. So those three variables we can almost always control, especially in stranger-directed aggression cases, because most people will listen to our direction, right? Like say, Uncle Bob, stay 10 feet away, stand there, don't stare at the dog. And, so that's the first step, setting the stage for success. Then what we look to do is one of two things, and they're usually doing both at the same time anyways when we're using a positive reinforcement-based strategy, and that is helping the dog have a better association with that person. And so we usually use food, and we can pair the arrival of strangers with food or the sight of a stranger with food. And then we're, of course, using the dog's most favorite thing. And so the dog can start to learn, all right, if I see this guy, Uncle Bob, show up, that's when the cheese starts. Interesting. So maybe Uncle Bob isn't so bad after all. But that cheese, it doesn't matter where it's coming from. It could be coming from the dog's guardian. It could be coming from Uncle Bob. So we have to determine what's going to be best for the dog. If Uncle Bob needs to be 30 feet away where that's where the dog feels safe and is far enough distance, then the food, Uncle Bob's not going to have, unless he's got a real good arm, he's not going to be able to reach the dog with the cheese. So the cheese can come from the person. It can come from the sky. It doesn't matter, because it's the association we're trying to create. Is cheese happens when Uncle Bob shows up.
Love it.
So that's one part, is helping. We're trying to change that association, help the dog feel better about the person. And then the second part, we often can look at skills, foundational skills that we can use for when we need the dog to do something else. And we can keep it really simple. It could be as simple as like, hey, just look at Uncle Bob, then look back at me. And that's when the cheese will happen. So that's what we call the operant behavior, or the behavior that we're using that we can either cue. So we ask the dog, hey, just look at me. There's Uncle Bob. Now look at me. Here's your cheese. So that's one way to do it. Or you can let Uncle Bob be the actual cue to look back. So if you do it enough times, sometimes the dog knows, oh, I know what to do here. There's Uncle Bob. So I'm going to look at you for the cheese. And so the cue is Uncle Bob actually showing up. And if you do that enough times, you're going to get that behavioral response where Uncle Bob is cueing the dog to look back without even knowing it. And at the same time, the beautiful thing about that is you get the classical conditioning that comes wrong, or the association, right? So the dog's like, Uncle Bob shows up, I look at him, and then I look back at my guardian, and then I get the cheese. So I'm learning this new behavior skill, and the association's happening. So it's usually very straightforward and easy to do. It's just you have to be consistent with it, and you have to maintain it as well. You can't just stop cheese forever, because we want to ensure that the dog knows that not just Uncle Bob is safe, everybody's safe and cool that's coming over. And not always predicting cheese, but a lot of times it does. So we continue to maintain that association. But that's just one of many approaches you can take. That's the most common. And again, for anybody listening in that wants to hear the actual terms for it, it's desensitization and counter conditioning. That's the changing the association. And differential reinforcement, which is basically, what do you want the dog to do instead of attacking Uncle Bob?
So any behavior.
Alternative or incompatible or other, depending on which DR. Those are operant procedures, so operant training. And that's the usual go-to approach, but that can change depending on the dog. Some dogs don't take food. Some dogs might be doing it with a different cause or emotion. Some dogs may be doing it because they're of a particular breed they're saying, just like a border collie is going to go herd something that's moving around in a way that it doesn't want it to move. A livestock guardian dog might say, well, this is my people and this is my property. This is my flock. So I'm going to scare you away, and I'm not scared of you. I'm happy about doing this job. So we might take some different approaches, like just going with the operant procedure, meaning let's teach this livestock guardian dog what to do instead and not worry about the association.
Got it.
The dog's not fearful. So you might look at that approach. And some dogs, you have to determine what the reinforcer is for them. They may not be interested in food, or it could be so significantly stressful for them, even if the person's a mile away, that they're not going to take food. So sometimes we need to do some different approaches for that.
On that topic, I wanted to ask, and I'm very carefully, while I ask this, we don't diagnose, we don't prescribe, but have you had cases where they've gone to their vet and looped them in and maybe brought on board some event medication to be used during training to bring that anxiety level down to a level where the dog can feel safe enough to do the exercises?
Definitely. So it's sort of like flying, and I think that's top of mind for a lot of people right now. Is that
I use that exact same analogy.
They are, especially now, people are getting more and more afraid to fly because of the recent.
I'm like, do you have to pop a Xanax to get on a flight?
So
same thing.
Sometimes we can't control the environment. It's not like I can say, all right, I'm going to pop a 727, what is it, 737, whatever the flight into your driveway right now, so we can practice this at your pace, right? So it's either. With flying, it's either or. So for dogs, many of our dogs, they're in the same predicament because they may live in New York City and there's strangers everywhere. So it's not like something we can say, well, we're going to do gradual approximations. The dog's going to have to see strangers almost immediately sometimes. And usually it's these cases where the dog's recently adopted and they used to be in a rural environment. Now they're in a city. So it can be really difficult for them. Even if, just like we're going to say, we're going to drive you to a particular location where we can practice, that's easier for you, but you still have to get out of the apartment building or whatever it is. So those kind of cases where it's very difficult to control the environment, and we're doing the best we can to get that distance, decrease the duration, lower the intensity. We're doing all these things to help the dog, but the dog's still struggling. Those are really great candidates for exploring behavior medication with a veterinarian or veterinary behaviorist, because it can be super helpful to help the dog cope with those moments. Just like the person, taking something right before they fly, it'll help them cope with the process. And then imagine if you had a good therapist sitting next to you on that plane, doing behavioral therapy and talking you through it. So that's kind of what we're doing with the dogs in some of these scenarios where we need something to help them. And sometimes that'll start the ball rolling, because then they're like, I'm feeling good enough to eat here, or I'm feeling good enough to play or do, the different things that we're trying to, what we're doing as trainers and consultants to change the association for the dog. So because the meds are on board helping that, it can help with the learning process as well.
Awesome. That's great. So we're almost out of time. I wanted to ask one more question. In these scenarios, what are some common mistakes do you see people making with these dogs?
Yeah, I love this question. So thinking food is going to fix everything or using the food the wrong way is one of the most common ones. So you hear about like somebody adopting a shy dog and the shelter's like, yeah, just he needs a little time to warm up. So the person's like, yeah, I totally got this. I've had shy dogs in the past. And they're like, we'll just have Uncle Bob come over and feed him some treats and, take his time, and we'll have Auntie Sue come over or give some treats. And so lovely plan most of the time, but that can backfire because food can be coercive as well. So the analogy I use all the time is if I've got a stack of cash in one hand, right? So let's say it's 10. You're in the U.S. You got $10,000 in one hand. It's a stack of $100 bills, and I'm like, here you go. You say, hey, Susan, come on over. Here's your stack of hundreds. You can be like, oh, okay, right? Most people will be like, yeah, sure. But what if I have a gun in the other hand and I'm pointing it at you? So now I'm putting you in this really conflicted state. And that's what can happen with dogs is that they're like, ooh, I love hot dogs. But who's this guy? Oh, I guess I'll just deal with it. I'll go over and get the hot dog. Dog eats the hot dog. And then they're looking up. They're like, uh-oh, now I'm too close. Just like if you took that bundle of $100 bills out of my hand and I've still got the gun poined at you,
you don't feel safe.
It's going to put you in a very conflicted state. And your response might be, well, the only way I've took some self-defense classes. So the only way I know how to get out of here is to punch Mike in the face and run. or you might have some other skills you've learned, so dogs are no different. They might resort to what has worked for them. So using food to lure the dog closer to the human or things like that can be a problem. Or sometimes they think the dog's okay. They're not reading the body language well. So there's an absence, like there's no barking, growling, biting behaviors, but the dog is still, stiff, tense, staring at the person, really tracking them. And the person's like, well, this dog's okay with me now, so I can go over and pet the dog. So always ask the dog. Yeah. Always ask the dog. They're going to tell you what to do next.
Awesome. So we'll just reiterate, maybe if you're experiencing this with your dog, bring on board a qualified trainer or behavior consultant. They can walk you through the nuances of these things so that we're doing it right.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thank you for stopping by the dojo this week. This is your aspiring sensei, Susan Light, signing off. You can find me at doggydojopodcast.com, or I'm Susan Light LA on Instagram, Pinterest, and Facebook. The music was written by Mac Light. You can find him at maclightsongwriter.com. If you like the show, you can support it by subscribing, sharing it with your friends, rating it, and reviewing it on Apple Podcasts. Just a reminder, this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and does not constitute advice or professional services by either the host or any of the guests. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another new episode of the Doggy Dojo.